themselves in danger the moment they boarded the aircraft. Look at this world we're living in today. There are so many risks. Every commercial airplane passenger knows they could become the victim of a terrorist. Think of all the security checks they have to go through at the airport. Open your eyes, will you? The threat is obvious to everyone.
Do you believe that the passengers gave their consent to being killed just by buying a ticket?
It is a clear part of modern life, the way we live now.
There were children on that plane you shot down. Did they give their consent to being killed too?
Well, yes. Their parents did.
Well, if we followed your reasoning, the people in the stadium also put themselves in danger. In our modern life, as you describe it, everyone is aware of the dangers of being in a crowd, a subway, a concert. Is everyone that goes to the movies or shopping at a mall putting themselves in danger and consenting to being killed?
No, that's not what I meant. Look, people on airplanes are in particular danger. See, I looked at the whole thing differently. The people on that Delta plane had become a weapon. The terrorists had turned that whole plane into a weapon. That weapon is what I was fighting.
But you just said every human life has meaning. When you claim the passengers are a weapon, aren't you turning them into objects?
That's what they were. That's what they had become.
Is there anything human about them anymore, as far as you're concerned? Are they still even people? Doesn't the fact that they are human negate them just being an object?
No, maybe you can afford these nice ideas, but I'm the one that was up there, okay? I'm responsible. I can't allow myself to reflect on the nature of human existence. I'm the one that has to make a decision. And I swore an oath when I was commissioned to faithfully serve the United States of America and to protect the rights and freedoms of all citizens. That oath means I will sacrifice my life to protect my country. That oath means the government will weigh the life of a single soldier against the threats and dangers to the people. The government does not exclude the possibility of some people being deliberately sacrificed to protect other people and our American values. A soldier has the duty to protect the people as a whole from harm.
Don't you think there's a difference between your life as a soldier and the government killing innocent passengers?
And that difference is?
A soldier would willingly sacrifice himself. You sacrifice others.
As a soldier, I am forced to think about how I can safeguard my country, okay? That's my job. Look, when you're flying up there, the only way that you can win is if you put yourself in your opponent's position. You have to anticipate what he's going to do, counselor. These terrorists, they kill innocent people every day, but you accuse me of killing 170 people, but it was my duty to eliminate that terrorist threat. In this case, I can't put myself between the terrorists and my countrymen. But I can use some of those countrymen to help me protect against a mass killing.
Captain Raymond, are you still convinced you did the right thing by shooting down that plane?
Yes, I am.
And you would do it again?
Yes.
There was no other possible course of action?
None.
And as you understood your duty, the passengers on that plane had to be killed?
Yes, I do.
One final question, Captain. Would you have shot that plane down if your wife and son were on it?
What?
Your wife and son. If they were on that plane, would you have killed them too?
Objection, Your Honor.
Counselor, it is our task with this special proceeding to determine whether the defendant's statements are true proof of intent or whether they are simply excuses. Now, clearly, the prosecution's question is designed to answer that. You may proceed, counsel.
I cannot answer that question.
Precisely. And why can't you answer that? Because it's a matter of life and death for others, not a question of your personal sworn oath of duty. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Counselor.
Mr. Nicholson, do you have any more questions from your client?
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Then you may return to your seat, Captain. If I hear no objections, we shall proceed to hearing the co-plaintiff as a witness. Mrs. Pendleton, you are a co-plaintiff in this proceeding. The court would like to hear your testimony. Please, take a seat. Just a few questions for the record. What is your full name?
Fanny. Frances Maria Pendleton.
And where do you live?
Weehawken, New Jersey.
What is your profession, Mrs. Pendleton?
I'm a head nurse at Hoboken University Medical.
Are you related to the defendant in any way?
No.
You may proceed, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mrs. Pendleton, your husband was one of the 170 passengers who died on board Delta Flight 3105.
No.
No?
He didn't die. You killed him. You killed them all. They didn't die. You murdered them.
Mrs. Pendleton, we can take a pause at any time that you wish.
I'm fine.
Take a moment if you'd like.
I'm fine.
Mrs. Pendleton, I know this is hard. But would you please describe the events of that day? It's important for the record.
That morning, my husband called to tell me he was headed back. He'd flown to Pittsburgh for a meeting, and he was returning in time for the championship game. We were avid Eagles fans. I had done 2 night shifts in a row at the hospital, so I had a day off. I decided to pick him up. I left our daughter with my mother. When I got to the airport, the arrivals board was reading delayed. I got a cup of coffee. Lights are often delayed these days.
What happened after you read the flight had been delayed?
I was waiting in line for my coffee when I got a text.
And what did the text say?
I'll read it to you. The police confiscated and still have my phone. We've been hijacked by terrorists. We are trying to get into the cockpit. Don't be afraid. We will make it. I love you. I wrote straight back, but there was no answer.
What did you write?
I can't remember exactly. I think it was something like, "Oh God, it's happened."
And what happened after you received that text?
I showed my phone to a policeman and explained that my husband would never make a joke about that sort of thing. The policeman, he was so young. He looked like a high school kid. He turned bright red. I remember that very clearly. He called someone on his radio and then took me to a room somewhere behind the security desks. I could tell everyone was very nervous. People kept tearing in and out the whole time. In and out, in and out.
When did they admit to you that the plane had been hijacked?
Oh, they didn't. An older policeman came in and tried to calm me down. I've been a nurse for 30 years, and I know how you're trained to talk to patients, and that's what he sounded like. I didn't believe him.
And then?
Eventually, another policeman came in, and he headed directly to me. He was with a woman. She wasn't in uniform. They sat down next to me, and he spoke in a calm voice, which only made me more nervous. He said that the plane had been hijacked and then shot down. They were looking for survivors.
Did you ever find out who that woman was?
A psychologist. She asked me if I needed any help, but I didn't want any help. I didn't have a clue what could possibly help. My daughter at my mother's in my childhood bed, not knowing any of this. She's who I kept thinking about, my daughter, not my husband. I really can't remember anymore. The young policeman, he took me back to the main terminal. He asked if there was anyone who could come and get me. He asked if I wanted him to take me home. He asked if he could walk me to my car. I just wanted to be left alone. I sat down on a bench, watching escalators, expecting him to come down. Couldn't cry. There were police running all over the place. It was filled with screams, complete chaos. I could barely remember anything. Oh, except hearing the names over the loudspeaker, over and over. And I just sat on that bench. Couldn't even call my mother. And I was waiting for him. Watching escalators. Hoping for him to come down. Lost so suddenly, and not to be able to see him again and say goodbye.
I think we should take a break now, Counselor.
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Mrs. Pendleton, one final question, please. Didn't you visit the police again later?
Oh, yeah. I got a letter. All the relatives were invited to visit a hangar at the 105th Air Wing base in Newburgh.
And what was there?
Oh, that's where all their things were. The personal effects from the wreckage. They were laid out on all these long metal tables. I looked at everything very closely, along with the other lost people. Battered suitcases. Watches with only one band. Burned briefcases. But nothing of my husband's. But then, at the very back, at the last table, I saw one of my husband's shoes. His left shoe. It was in good condition. No scratches, no blood. My husband always looked after his shoes and always bought expensive ones. I took the shoe from the table. I had to sign for it. sat next to me all the way home. My daughter's only 7. At the funeral, she asked me, "What's in the coffin if Daddy's not in it?" I didn't know what to say. She was right. We were burying an empty coffin. It felt stupid saying goodbye to an empty coffin. Later, I buried that shoe in the woods behind the house where he liked to walk.
I am so sorry, Mrs. Pendleton.
That's what everyone says. Sorry. It doesn't mean anything.
Okay. Any further questions from either of you?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
You're excused, Mrs. Pendleton, with the court's thanks.
You may stay for the rest of the trial if you wish.
Only if you can promise I won't hear any more sorries.
Well, if there are no more questions, then that concludes this portion of this special proceeding. Is the prosecution prepared to make a closing statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
And we will now hear closing statements from both the prosecution and the defense. You may proceed.
Your Honors, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I will state clearly, the defendant is not a criminal. His actions are far different than those usually tried. He has not killed his wife, her lover, committed fraud, nor stolen. In fact, by society standards, Thomas Raymond has up until now led a blameless life. He has done nothing wrong. He has lived his life without fault. I have been impressed with the integrity and seriousness of his character. Thomas Raymond is not one of those defendants who's excused what he's done with tales of childhood trauma, psychic disorder, or some such. He is intelligent, level-headed, and fully able to distinguish between right and wrong. In fact, he can do so far better than most. Everything Captain Raymond did, he did with full awareness and absolute clarity. He was and is still sure that what he did was the right thing. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defense counsel is right. This case revolves around one single question. Are we allowed to kill innocents in order to save others? Granted, in the spur of the moment, we might all do just that. It seems like it's the right thing to do. Maybe we wouldn't be quite sure, and it would take some effort in order for us to overcome our doubts, but we would weigh things, we would test our conscience, and we would believe that we were acting reasonably. If so, we could end this trial right now by finding the defendant not guilty. But as we have heard, our statute of both natural and criminal law, carved into stone tablets by Hammurabi in 1750 BC, demand different from us. Part 8, Statute 235 of the International Criminal Law states that acts that are premeditated, no matter for how brief a time, as willful, deliberate murder, any other terminology is irrelevant. Ladies and gentlemen, I know we all believe that we can decide this case based upon ideas which stand above the law, ideas that even replace the law. We all believe that we can rely upon our own sense of morality and our own consciences, but it just isn't true. A famous case is often quoted for a point in ethics, is known as the runaway train problem. In it, a runaway train is hurtling down a steep mountain path headed toward a tiny station. There at a switch, a passenger train is waiting. If that train continues, it will kill hundreds of passengers. But you are at the switch. You have the ability to divert the train to a siding. But here's the catch. There are 5 hard hats working on repairing the tracks on that siding. If you throw the switch, you will kill those 5 workmen. What would you do? Accept those 5 deaths as a price to be paid? Most of us say, divert the train. Well, what do you say? How many of you say, divert the train and kill those 5 workmen to save the passengers? Let me see a show of hands. Now let's slightly change the scenario. We are still watching that runaway train hurtling down the path, except this time there is no switch, no siding. You are now watching a train wreck as it is about to happen. Next to you is a large man. If his body were to fall off the bridge, it would land on the tracks and be run over by the train, but it would save the passengers. But you can't just push him off. You would have to kill him first. If you killed him with, let's say, a knife, you would then be able to push his body down onto the tracks and save the passengers on the train. Now what would you do? Now how many of you are willing to kill this man? Show me your hands. Most of us would not be able to kill this man. But what's changed? Only one thing. You would now have to kill him with a knife in your own hands. And most of us couldn't do it. And we can't. There is no substantial difference between the two situations. In the first case, we were prepared to kill 5 men. Now we say it is impossible to kill only 1. Suddenly it is impossible to make the right decision. We must admit that there is no certainty in a moral question. My point? We all make mistakes. It's in our nature. Morality, conscience, common sense, natural law, all of these things are suspect. We cannot be certain of a correct course of action at any given moment. And we cannot know we'll come to that same conclusion again tomorrow. So we need something more reliable than just our spontaneous impulses or instincts. Something we can use to judge in any situation. Something that will provide us with sure, clear answers in the midst of chaos. We need and depend upon principles. Some of those principles are stated in our Bill of Rights. The 14th Amendment states, "One shall not deprive another of life and liberty without due process of the law." That was derived in 1215 from the Magna Carta and later reaffirmed in the English Bill of Rights in 1689. That very principle is fundamental to our state and nation. As recently as 1998, the International Criminal Court in The Hague defines murder in the first degree occurs when premeditated, planned, willful, and deliberate taking of life transpires. Breaking that law subjects one to the most severe punishment, either death or life imprisonment. Ladies and gentlemen, if we want to have a state and society in which justice is to prevail, the law must also prevail. It is up to you to make sure that law is not breached. It is no fault of Captain Raymond that when he fired, the stadium was full. It was no fault of his that the members at the command center failed to evacuate the stadium. Could it have been evacuated in time? We don't know. It has no more relevance than speculating if The cockpit door could have been breached and the then terrorists overcome. Could they have beat down that cockpit door? How far did they get? We don't know. Could the pilot of the Delta aircraft have acted differently? This also we don't know. And why don't we know all this? Because the defendant decided that those passengers would die. He had no order. Quite the opposite. He acted in defiance of orders. His actions flouted all law. The philosopher Immanuel Kant says that all of our human laws depend fundamentally upon individual dignity. The individual should never be turned into an object. Captain Raymond trained to make the correct decision in the most trying of circumstances. He thought for hours about what he would do, and so now he must bear the consequences. Captain Raymond is not a hero. He is a killer. He denied those passengers their lives. He turned them into objects. Sometimes the law demands a great deal of us, more than we think we could ever bear. But law is more intelligent than our emotions of fear or anger.